All right, so welcome. We are going to make this a little bit more casual since we have a small group today. But I thought Nolan and Stephen could start by just sharing a little overview of what the Civility Project is, introducing yourselves to the group, and then Lisa, you can why don't we start with Lisa? You introduce your group, and then Nolan and Stephen can take it away, and then we'll just make it a conversation.
Hi, so we're the advisory board for the Padnos Sarosik Center for Civil Discourse at Grand Valley State University. We are missing a few of our members today who can't be here with us and a few folks who are on their way. So hopefully we'll be all here soon. And welcome, and we're so glad to be spending this hour with you this afternoon.
Thank you.
So Nolan and Stephen, do you guys want to start with an overview?
Stephen, you want to kick her off?
I think Stephen's frozen.
Stephen, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
There he is.
Go ahead.
I'm back.
Do you want to start?
We need to run our video, right?
It should be running. Oh, you want to do the, okay, sure, yeah, I can do that. I'm sorry, I hadn't queued it up because we were going to make this a little more casual. So my apologies. But yeah, give me a second and I will pull it up. Bear with me a quick second. We have a introductory video that we often run. My apology, we haven't had these in a few weeks, and so I guess I wasn't as ready as I should be, you guys. But I
No worries.
amend that right now. Do you want the sizzle reel or the sponsor video?
Sizzle reel.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's do this. Can you all see? Green screen? Yeah?
Yes.
There's been so much over the last couple of years, this notion that we can't talk to each other, and I believe we can talk to each other.
I'm the first person to say, this is not easy.
Look at the way our media has become bunkered on the cable news channels and on the internet. You're all conservative, you're all liberal. They don't talk across lines, they fight.
And to say, well, this is somehow
You can't shut
inappropriate.
down thoughts.
Hold on, it's not about
Hang on,
shutting down.
She's not saying shut down.
She's not.
That's not what you're going to do.
She's saying, I don't just think it's President Trump. I think it's the environment has become toxic, and if you're not on the attack, you get eaten.
When they sat down together and talked about the work they did to have a friendship, I'm like, how in the world?
Both of us have been made better in the work that we do by the relationship we've been able to build, which, is tense at times. Sometimes it is uncivil. You see it on TV.
Even among political commentators, if you will, and opinion journalists, there isn't that much interaction today. There's not that comfort level for people to have good, healthy debates and discussions.
The sort of key word for this project is the ability to sit and listen to somebody else, listen to someone else's story, and listen in a way that really respects what they're saying as opposed to anticipating what you might say in response.
Okay. So do you guys want to start with an overview of what we're trying to do with the Civility Project, and then we can open it up to a conversation?
Okay, who's starting today? Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the best way to understand, I think, the idea behind the Civility Project is as an effort by Nolan and I to share some of the things that we've learned over the last 15 years of working together, but also being friends, in an effort to help bridge some of the divides that have really opened up over that same period of time. Nolan and I met in 2007 when I came back to Detroit from my work in Washington, and became the editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press, which is of course the liberal newspaper here in Detroit. Nolan was already the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, which is the conservative newspaper here. And I think pretty quickly people identified the opportunity to kind of pair us up and see what would happen if you put us both, together on the radio or television on a panel, and see if we would fight. And we proved them right over and over again. We got very good at arguing. It was immediately apparent that that we didn't share opinions, share views on just about anything. I mean, you toss any issue in the middle between us and we could have an argument about it. At the same time, though, as we started to do this over years, I think we both started to realize that there was more to the other than the sum of their political opinions, and that when you got to thinking about what more there was and knowing about more there was a lot of commonality. There were a lot of things that we shared, a lot of interest, a lot of ideas, and that we could sit and talk about those things too, and that we could actually be friends. So this is in 2007, 2008, when the election of Barack Obama is kind of the headline event. If you think back to then, the country was pretty divided at that point. I mean, that was a pretty bitter election. A lot of people were disappointed with the outcome. And a lot of people were surprised even then. I think that even through all of that, Nolan and I were able to maintain a civil relationship. Well, fast forward that 8 years to 2016, when the presidential election is much more bitter and the outcome has many more people upset, and the relationships that people have with others who don't share their views really start to break down, right? You think about all the people who after the 2016 election talked about losing friends, talked about the inability to have civil dinner conversations with their families at holidays, right? How many people couldn't go to Thanksgiving that year or didn't? Things got much worse. And I think that was kind of a cue for us to start thinking more about what it was about our interactions that seemed to survive all of this. Like, no matter what else was happening or how hard we were arguing about issues, we were able to maintain that level of civility, but also maintain the rest of the relationship. And so we started to think about what things mattered in those interactions, what things made that possible. And over the next several years, we started to really think about the opportunity to get people together across political divides in order to try to learn about how we do it and see whether those lessons were valuable for other people. We started with what we call bourbon parties. Bourbon was one of the things very early on that Nolan and I identified that we did agree on. We both quite like it. Nolan is from Kentucky, and I spent the first 2.5 years of my career working in Kentucky, and so we had this real affinity for the liquor that is distilled and made in that state. So we started having parties where we would invite my friends, my liberal friends, we'd invite his conservative friends and get them together to drink bourbon together and think about that, but then also try to get to know each other a little better. Try to see whether it's possible to have conversations, civil conversations with people you disagree with. And that got more formalized into this project as things just broke down even more in our country, and some important institutions like the Chamber of Commerce and Delta Dental of Michigan decided that it was time to kind of put us on the road and have us talk specifically to groups like yours about what's happened over this last 15 years and how we've navigated it, and what the opportunity is to be able to think differently about our differences, not let them be the reason that we don't interact with people, especially people close to us, and how we build relationships that that are not susceptible to the absolute antipathy and rancor that we see over politics. One thing we always want to make clear when we start talking about this is, this is not a lesson in kumbaya or some other kind of docile interaction. As you could see in the sizzle reel, Nolan and I, when we disagree, we really disagree, and we get at it, and we get after each other. And sometimes it is pretty passionate, and sometimes it's angry. We're not talking about avoiding those emotions or avoiding those kinds of things. We're saying that if you build a relationship with somebody, you're able to actually interact in that way. You're able to be yourself, to stick by your guns, to believe the things that you believe, but not engage in destructive kinds of interactions that send the relationship into jeopardy.
Yeah, I think Steve, as Steve said, we're not out to build consensus or agreement across the divide. What we're trying to do is tone down the hate. We are trying to encourage civil conversations with the goal of respect and understanding, because what we're seeing now is this great buildup of hate in our society, and it stems from the incivility and our inability to talk to each other and to learn about each other. We make too many assumptions about each other, and we tend now, if somebody agrees with us, to assign really negative, awful characteristics to that person. You see it now just boiling in this country over this the abortion issue since the Supreme Court ruling was leaked. The people on each side think the people on the other, there's something evil and sinister about the people on the other side. And a basic premise of the Civility Project is that all good people come to their opinions in the same way. They take the information, the data available, they run it through the filters of their own values and experiences and come up with an opinion, a viewpoint. If it's different from yours, it doesn't make them evil, doesn't make them sinister, doesn't make them somebody you can't approach. And too often, that's how we view it. And those assumptions, lead to hate, and hate leads to all sorts of bad things. And so, I always sum up this project as, an effort to tone down the hate and get people to talk to each other with the goal of trying to build understanding and, not, as I said, not necessarily agreement, but at least a level of respect and understanding that will allow us to have the additional discussions and conversations that might lead to compromise on some issues. And so, that's what we've been trying to do here for the last couple of years. We have a few exercises, advice, tips that we go through, and we'll get to them as we go through this discussion. But as Lynne said, since it is such a small group, and we do have the chance to have a more personal conversation today, why don't we start with that? What do you want to know from us, and how might we help you?
Yeah, I think we can make this a conversation if you guys would like to jump in, or you can raise your hand if you like, and also how this applies to you in your advisory capacity as well. Lisa.
So I'll just jump in. So one of the things that I find difficult to figure out how to navigate, and I'm wondering how you navigate that, is So I'm a big believer in starting out the conversation with everything sort of around the conversation, because our personal stories and our life experiences, if we can share that with one another, we're more apt to be able to have a civil conversation about whatever the topic at hand is. But I'm wondering, in the face of so much, I think that very notion of truth is being contested, and what is a fact. And if we can't agree on what is real, quote unquote, or what is true and what is a fact, then it seems really hard to have the conversation. I don't know if you have any thoughts
No,
around that.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely correct, and that's what we're all about here. I think you're starting with some of the right goals, but at the wrong point. We don't ask people. In fact, we encourage them not to start by debating facts or debating truth or debating opinion. Start by trying to figure out who the other person is, as you said in the beginning. And when we deal with groups where we put different people together, people of different views together, we ask them to avoid the political discussions at first and to start out asking questions. Try to figure out who the person you're talking to is, what their values are, what are the experiences that inform their decision making. So you're seeing them as, ultimately learning to see them as a person who has formed their decisions through probably the same process you have. And Steve and I did this a few years ago, several years ago now, for StoryCorps on NPR, and I'll let Steve tell you about that. He's much more articulate on that experience than I am.
Yeah, so StoryCorps is an effort at NPR to kind of collect American stories about relationships. People go, they travel around the country in this little Winnebago and invite people to come down and spend an hour sitting and talking with somebody close to them about their relationship and how it works, and what's important about it. When I came to Detroit, I almost immediately thought that instead of taking a spouse or a close, family member, which is what most people do, I was going to take Nolan with me down there. And I told him that what I wanted us to do was not go in there and talk about the things that we argue about all the time. I actually wanted us to go and tell each other our stories, right? I wanted him to sit and explain to me how he became a conservative. What were the experiences he had? What were the things that kind of led him to this place where he believes that the right way to solve problems is with conservative solutions. And then I was going to do the same. I was going to talk to him about what leads me to be a liberal or a progressive or whatever label you want to put on it. Why do I think that's the best way to solve problems through a liberal lens? We'd known each other for 10 years by the time we did this. So we knew a lot about each other, but having that conversation, I think told each of us a lot of things about the other that we didn't know. It certainly made us understand things about the other person that we didn't know before. Certainly gave us a better filter, I think, through which to put the other person's opinions when they're talking about it. That you really do understand where that person is coming from. The other thing that it did was, I think, it showed us how much more we had in common than we thought we did. That there were things about the way that both of us had come to the points of view that we had that were commonalities as well. Things about the belief in fairness, the belief in opportunity, the sort of striving for things to be better. I'm not sure that we really quite fully understood that about each other before that. And so, we did this after 10 years, and I think if you look at the way that we interacted before and after that point, you see a real difference. What we are encouraging people to do is do that up front, right? Before you start arguing with somebody, before you start disagreeing and debating over things, really find out more about who they are and where they come from and what they believe. And it does make it easier to be able to, to have these kind of conversations, and even to get into, heated arguments with somebody without it becoming uncivil. So you also asked about fact, though, and when there is a disagreement about facts. I actually think that is a really important question right now, because there's a whole industry of people who are manufacturing information. I mean, social media is full of people who get paid or make money off making up lies, things that we know aren't true. And I do think it's important to call that out. I do think it makes it impossible to have arguments about the issues that divide us when there is that kind of misinformation campaign. For instance, somebody who says Donald Trump really won the 2020 election, or that Joe Biden got fraudulent votes, and that's how he won. That's a lie. It's been exposed as a lie. There's no evidence to support those statements, and so that does make it very difficult to have an actual exchange with somebody if they believe that. But let's talk about another issue. And look, I don't think either of us is saying you have to kind of accept that kind of tactic from somebody, or the kind of gaslighting that goes on with people trying to flood the conversation zone with misinformation. But let's talk about another issue that's in front of us right now, abortion, and this notion that the Supreme Court is really going to change the way that we deal with that issue in this country. One person could say life begins at conception, and they might really believe that. That might be their religious belief, that might be their scientific belief, and somebody else could say, I actually don't believe that. I actually feel like life begins when you're born, for instance, or when you become a viable human life, independent human life. Too often in that debate, what we've seen is people say that the facts are what divide us, right? One side believes one thing, one side believes another. And that's not the same thing as, the kind of misinformation or kind of spreading of falsehoods. In order to be able to talk to people about abortion and what the law ought to look like, what our culture ought to look like, I think we got to be able to understand a lot more about how the other side thinks. And this is the hardest issue to do it on, right? I mean, this is an issue that has divided this country for half a century. And both sides have really dug into their positions over that time, precisely because they're not talking to each other, precisely because we're not understanding what the other side thinks. And look, I mean, I have as passionate a set of beliefs on this as anybody, and I see it the way that I see it, and I believe that it connects to a suite of independence and privacy that is the very essence of our Constitution. But I've got to be able to understand where somebody's coming from who believes that life begins at conception. I've got to be able to know why somebody thinks that and understand where that belief comes from in order to have the conversation about it. I can have a conversation with the people who agree with me, very easily because we agree on those things and we do understand the same kinds of values and issues around it. What we're not doing is being able to say, well, why do you believe that? Where does that belief come from? Your belief, not mine. If you believe life begins at conception, let's talk about that. Not as a way of convincing me that it's true, but of educating me about where you're coming from. We don't think about these issues in those terms enough. We think I'm going to argue with somebody who's pro-life because I'm going to show them, right? I'm going to shut them up. I'm going to embarrass them. I'm going to make them look foolish in order to make my point. I think what we're trying to encourage, and look, there are times and places you got to do that, right? There are times and places where you are trying to advocate or to win your side of the policy debate. We're talking about in interpersonal conversations where the goal is not to win or to embarrass somebody else. It really should be to try to understand more about who they are and where they come from. And so, you know, the dispute over facts doesn't often enter this part of the exchanges that we're talking about, right? It is much more about understanding than it is about right or wrong or fact or lie. And again, that's not to dismiss the importance of those distinctions in some other contexts. It's to say that I think what we're trying to encourage is an alternate kind of exchange in different circumstances.
And it's particularly important on this issue because you know, most people, we talk about it as one side versus the other side, as if there's clear divide on this issue. But most people aren't out there carrying signs and screaming. The vast majority of Americans fall somewhere in the middle on this issue. So they adopt pieces of both arguments. They believe abortion should be legal, but they also believe it should be regulated so that choices are made responsibly. And then provide some opportunity here, if we'll listen to each other and have the conversations, to craft policies that represent the broadest views possible and don't come down 100% one position, 100% or another, that is going to lead us to fighting about this for another 50 years. I think it's important to realize that everybody thinks they're the only ones who talk to God. They're the only one, that their facts, their truths are the absolutes. And I think we ask people to sort of check that self-righteousness, that smugness at the door. And as Steve mentioned, engage with the goal of understanding, setting honest goals for the conversation. You're not out there trying to convert. Very few conversations will lead to a conversion. We're trying to gain some understanding. You know, when Steve and I argue, when we have these debates and discussions, I'm not trying to change his mind. You know, I'm hoping to learn something, to sharpen my own opinion. And, you know, I long ago learned that it's important to hear him out, to listen to him, because, you know, there are places where we can find some common ground and we can find some surprises in the discussion. But you got to listen to get there.
I have a question, if I may. The process of doing these things, the process of coming to an understanding, I understand if there is some motivation by the participants to engage in that exercise of understanding and respect. The thing that troubles me deeply right now in our culture and our politics in particular is that there are seemingly an awful lot of the participants who view it as weakness to pursue understanding and respect. And so my question is, how do you get a group of people to engage in this and not be just preaching to the choir? I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, we've done it both with groups and with individuals. We start out by, the process we described, and, there does have to be, people do have to see some value in the process and in the value in developing relationships across the political divide. And too often we're assuming hate. I've read something you said, I've heard something you said, so I hate you. And we get that, Steve and I get that all the time. I tell a story early on when he and I were on Mackinac Island for a Republican state convention, sitting at the bar late one night drinking. And, I get up, walk away, and these two women I know pounce on me and says, "Oh, how could you be talking to him? How could you be friends with him? That's Steve Henderson. He's awful. We hate him." And those words were so jarring to me. And I asked them, "Do you know him?" And they said, "No, we've never talked to him." I said, "Well, talk to him." Hour and a half later, I pull him away from them and they say, "Oh, thank you. He's just great. We love him." Now, nothing about Steve changed. Nothing about them changed. They took the time to know him as someone other than his politics and what they thought they knew him. And that's what we're asking people to do. I mean, you ask people to engage in a process where they think it's going to involve changing who they are and changing what they believe. You get all sorts of resistance. If you ask them to engage on a more personal level, to try to find the value in another person with the hopes of learning something you didn't know, a little bit easier to get them to do. And, we had another example. We did this on for the chamber one time. They had 80 people. They divided up one on one. And, each person, one conservative, one liberal, maybe different religions, whatever, but they were different. We had these two women who were friends. They walked together every morning, and they knew that they had different political beliefs, but they didn't discuss them. 7 years they had been walking every morning without discussing their political beliefs, and that's an easy way to get through life if you can manage to do it. We set them down in this exercise and asked them to tell us about their experience, and they said, "Look, we understand each other a lot better now. I knew this person was a conservative. I knew the other one was liberal, but I didn't know why. And so I made a lot of assumptions about why." And so once they had that conversation, they understood each other. Their friendship was able to deepen a little. So, I mean, there are rewards to this, and you have to convince people there is value in talking across the divide.
So one thing I've been pointing out too is, there's a lot in the culture right now that discourages this.
Mhm.
And the sort of the infrastructure for dealing with or thinking about issues is one of them. I think you think of the 24-hour news cycle, and the drumbeat on cable news in particular of coverage of really simplistic coverage of issues as either or one side versus another. And now these segments that aren't even about coverage, they're about massive collections of opinion on both sides, where people are just kind of arguing and shouting at each other. And the framing there is always, who's going to win, right? Which side is going to prevail over the other or embarrass the other, or I'm even sure there's a conceit that one side would convince the other. It really is just about battle, and we see that amplified even, I think, on social media, where because we control the flow of information to ourselves on it, because we choose the communities that we interact with and live in on social media, that instinct to isolate and then sort of identify others, quote unquote, is really powerful. And even on an individual level, this idea of, well, if I don't like this person or what they say on social media, I'm going to block them or I'm going to unfriend you. And of course, it's not enough just to do it. You have to tell everybody else, I block that person. I'm never talking to them again. And then everybody cheers. I mean, these are all influences that suggest there isn't a way to interact with people you don't agree with in a civil way. And so some of what we're asking people to do, I think, is to push back against that, is to say, okay, in my own life, in the spaces where I actually live and have some agency and can have a say over interactions, I have an opportunity to do it differently. It's not to say you can't do those things. I mean, look, social media can be fun, and lots of people, I think, get a lot of gratification out of interacting there. But here, in your family, in your school community, in your neighborhood, in your church, places where you actually are dealing with people face to face, one-on-one. I think that's what we're talking about, is the opportunity to do this. And I think you find people in those places who are more eager to do this than you will on social media, for instance. I think there's a real frustration that's very common with the inability to do this and the lack of opportunity to know how to do this, how to even start these conversations. We're not talking about solving these kind of, I think, huge, societal issues that are reflected on cable news and social media. We're talking about the breakdown of, individual exchange of ideas among people who think differently. And we do that in spaces that are much closer in, and where we have a lot more power, I think, than we do on those other places.
And, in our political leaders.
May I say something, please? Is that possible? So I started, my humble apologies. My name is Jeff Kelly Lowenstein. I'm the endowed professor of civil discourse. I really appreciate you guys being here. And I know both of your work and your leaders in our community. So I'm really grateful to you for joining us. And thank you, Lynn, for your leadership, and Lisa for creating the opportunity. I'm in California, and I've been pressed into nephew pickup duty, which then has kind of made my day a little different.
I understand. We
a
surely
little
understand.
a little different. So I just wanted to thank both of you and say that the focus of the class that I teach, which will be running in the fall, is really around journalism and global civil discourse. And so I welcome the opportunity subsequently to talk with and learn with both of you, but you have an open invitation to think about, participating in our class. One of the things that we do in the class is the students pick these kind of hot button issues of the day, and then dialogue around them. And this past year in particular, I was really heartened because, as opposed to the first year I taught the class, where we talked about kind of the dialogue and all the kinds of exciting things that both of you are talking about in terms of how to construct meaningful and vigorous disagreement. There weren't a whole lot of different points of view politically within the class, but last year they were more aligned with what you're describing, Stephen, and what I've read from your work, including the Pulitzer-winning commentaries, which I've read and admire on a number of different levels. And there were fewer folks, Nolan, coming from your side of things. But last semester, then the fall semester, there really one student in particular was a very active member politically, was looking to engage across different divides, was avowedly conservative, and so that really deepened the exchange within the class. And the students at the end of the class said, I really disagreed with some of the things this student said, but his presence really helped deepen that. So the work that you two are really engaged with through the Civility Project is just very exciting. And so I think I could see a lot of complementary ways to perhaps collaborate together. And I just wanted to share in the chat that the students and I have worked on within journalism, civil discourse, journalism, computer science, and then also French and language colleagues to build this civil discourse map, this global civil discourse map, because many of the disturbing patterns that you're describing, Stephen, in terms of social media and discrediting people, and like what you were just talking about, Nolan, in terms of kind of basically trying to undermine anybody who is sharing accurate information or information that even differs, they're a very consistent set of strategies. So what we've tried to do is to create first a quantitative and then a more qualitative baseline to stimulate the kind of conversation that you guys are having here in Michigan, here in Detroit, really nationally, on sort of a broader national and international basis. So I just shared that in the chat and welcome the chance to get you guys input on that.
Well, we
So,
appreciate that, Jeff, and I know you've got to run. Before you go, we would just tell you that we are planning now a civility day at Oakland University for their civil or their civic engagement program. It's be the first of its kind, talking about a lot of different elements to it. You might want to participate that or come by that with the goal of maybe we could bring it to Grand Valley at some point. We'd like to do this on other college campuses if it works out.
okay, no, thank you very much for the invitation. And Lynn, I've shared that. And obviously, Lisa will coordinate with you as the director around kind of what works for the program. But this just sounds really exciting. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I apologize that I do need to sign
good.
off just a little bit early. So lovely to meet you, and thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, I mean, to finish up on the earlier conversation, there is considerable profit in a lot of circles in keeping us divided. You know, our political leaders find it very advantageous to keep us frightened and angry at the other side, if you will, with the hopes that we'll overlook the deficiencies of their side and just jump in with them. And we see that sort of stoking of anger, stoking of mistrust going on all the time. And it's not a healthy place for us to be.
I'm really interested in your possibilities at Oakland University, and I think it would be well for us to see what happens there. Because I have felt, as Lisa knows, that in the perfect world, this issue that we're talking about right now would be a major part of freshman orientation for the entire school. And I think Grand Valley would be a good one because it has a remarkably, to my way of thinking, a diverse student body when it comes to liberal and conservative first generation students and those who aren't. And the problem that I was addressing with my question was in the broader community. How do you get people who are not from the same red or blue bubble to devote some time to this issue? And I'm looking at the two of you and wondering if you've got some experience with groups that came together and found value that would be instructive to us who are interested in this.
Yeah, I think there has been a greater appetite and greater interest in this as the incivility has increased in our society. A lot of people out there recognize the dangers of this and are tired of all the bickering and all the fighting and are looking for places where they can sort of have civil, honest discussions without the anger and without the fear. And I do think we are seeing a lot more interest from groups that are not aligned with one side or the other side, but recognize that their organizations, their communities would be healthier if people could have an honest civil dialogue. I think the fact that your center exists is a very encouraging sign. And this idea of making civility part of a freshman orientation is terrific. I mean, to come right in the door, assuring students that, you know, this is a place they could express themselves without fear, is a positive thing.
It is hard to, I mean, it's hard to convince people. I mean, and again, I mean, I think our goal is to give people a sense, number one, of the value of this, that there is a value, even if you don't plan to change your mind or back down, that talking to someone who sees it differently from you can help you understand, you know, not just the issue better, but certainly the landscape of the issue. I mean, Nolan and I all the time, I think, come away from our arguments with an understanding or information that we didn't have before. And you know, I mean, we're two people who are paid to know a lot about the things that we're talking about. But talking to each other still leads us to places that neither of us had gone on our own. The other thing I say a lot now is, you know, what's the alternative to this? If we're not going to talk to each other, if we're not going to be able to talk to each other, then what, you know, what becomes of these massive disagreements that frame our politics and our culture? And I think that's a much heavier question in many ways. You know, on January 6th of last year, I think we saw what happens when there's a complete breakdown of the ability to discuss things in a civil way and accept that other people, you know, sometimes win in a democracy and sometimes you lose. You know, I sat watching that, not just in horror over what they were doing, but in absolute kind of desperation that many people had reached that kind of extreme frustration with the idea of the other side. You know, I think that's been produced as much by our inability to have civil disagreements and have discussions and have people understand where other people are coming from, as it was, you know, the instant motivation, which of course was the election itself. And I mean, it was a heated election and people felt very strongly about it. But I think without that that breakdown of civil disagreement, that wouldn't have happened. And so I just, you know, if we're not going to submit to the idea that we're going to fight this out in the streets or whatever, you know, I think we have to start thinking about ways that we can actually interact and agree that sometimes those interactions might be bitter and we don't change anybody's mind, but that there was value in the exchange itself. But I admit that's not an easy sell, and it's a harder and harder sell as things get more and more divided.
And, you know, before the last election, I saw a poll that said 72% of the people don't have conversations with people who don't agree with them politically. That's shocking number. And I don't think it's entirely because they don't want to engage with people who don't agree with them. I think there's a good deal of fear. There's a good deal of apprehension, discomfort. People are conflict adverse. And so if we can take some of the risk out of it by starting with this idea of getting to know each other and respect each other, I think it would encourage more of those discussions. But, you know, we've got to be talking to each other. We don't have a choice.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Are there any last questions or topics we can address to help you in your work on the advisory board?
Can you guys tell us more about what the board does and what it is?
Would somebody else like to field that? I don't want to be the only spokesperson. I can be the only spokesperson if somebody else doesn't want to do that.
I mean, how did this come to be? What, what made the college prioritize civil discourse? What was the motivation for this center?
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was trying to respond to your, I don't want to be the only. So my name is Mark Schaub. I'm currently the Dean of the Brooks College of Interdisciplinary Studies, is one of the colleges at Grand Valley in which this center is housed, and work with Lisa, who's the director on it. And you already met Jeff, who is one of the rotating faculty members, and Jeff happens to be a journalism faculty member. Huh. It came to us from donors. There's a couple, Carol Sarosik and Shelley Padnos, approached the institution and said, this is quite a number of years ago that they did this. I want to say 10 years, Lisa, if that's about ballpark correct. And they said, this is such an important issue, is that we need to have a mechanism where we can encourage for students as well as the wider community how to have these kinds of conversations with people with whom we disagree, and to overcome these divides that ultimately lead to violence. I think as your discussion is led to, our alternative of not doing this is the violence. Right. And they approached the institution and said, this is something we want to do. So in dialogue with the university, they said, in this college, this is an interdisciplinary project. They wanted to have this mechanism. So there's the course that Jeff teaches, and there's an annual symposia. There are other events that the center is involved with, and the advisory board are people who likewise agree this is of critical importance, not only to student education, but to our community, and they give us input on that process.
And the goal, Mark, is, what's the outcome you're seeking?
The outcome is to develop the next generation of students who then in their lives go on to fostering these kinds of conversations. The same kind of thing. We would love to have a whole bunch more Nolan Finleys and Stephen Hendersons leaving GVSU and going out into the world doing this.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like what, the goals that Oakland has set. And, I do think we could find some, cross cooperation there that, because we would really like to see this on almost every campus in the state, these sort of civility programs. I think that's where, as you said, it's where the best hope lies for actually making a societal difference.
Yeah, we're in the process of building a curriculum, and we're working with Oakland University, and we're going to pilot it there. And then our intention is to be able to really distribute this widely. And I know one of our goals that we're not quite there yet, but we're hoping to work toward, is a civility stamp on diplomas. That people have gone through this, and they're armed with the knowledge and the tools to perpetuate this out in the world too.
Yeah, because we do feel that it will have value to employers to know that students have gone through this kind of exercise and education.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Civility Day at Oakland. So I know there was supposed to be one on Friday that I had registered for.
Yep.
Do you know when the Oakland one is going to be?
It's going to be in the fall. I mean, we apologize for what happened with Henry Ford. That was out of our control, and we'll leave it at that. But I think Oakland's going to be in the fall, isn't it, Lynn?
We're working on an October date right now, so we can reserve. Yeah, it was a sudden change. It won't happen again, but we're really excited to do. We have actually a great lineup planned that we'll just try over, and that'll be great for the fall. And I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity, not only for people to learn all of these great tools and tips in person, but then put them into practice in one-on-one conversations. One of the big plans of the day is to do sort of speed dating like civility building one-on-one conversations. And so there'll be a lot of interactivity that I think will be really fruitful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any last questions before we sign off for today and say thank you for contacting us? Anybody? All right. Well, I did put my email in the chat. I'll put it in again. If any of you would like to be in touch, either to bring Stephen and Nolan to another facet of what you're doing, or if you'd like to participate in some, upcoming programs that we have, I'd love to chat with you. So feel free to reach out and we can figure out how that happens.
Great.
All right.
Thank you. And thank
Good
you
to be
everyone
with
from
you.
the advisory board for coming. I do want to just share, you all can sort of go. I just wanted to share with Nolan and Michael, and Stephen and Lynn. I was looking at Michael's name when I was talking. That next year on our campus, we're having a year-long focus on dialogue, and each month we're featuring a different conversation across different kind of event. So perhaps there's a conversation we can have about next year as well. Something.
Yeah, Lisa, please be in
Terrific.
touch with me. We do a monthly email newsletter, and I'd love to promote that in what we're doing to our audience, and maybe there's some, cross-pollination we can do as well.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right, great.
Thank you, everyone.
Hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.